The morning began like any other in Kandahar, Afghanistan, the kind of heat that made the air shimmer above the tarmac and the smell of jet fuel mix with dust. Helicopters sat lined like metallic beasts under the pale sun, their rotors ticking lazily in the warm breeze. Sergeant Alexandra Hayes, known to her unit as Hawk, adjusted her flight gloves and squinted toward the horizon. She'd been through dozens of missions before, but something about this one unsettled her. She couldn't explain it, just a whisper in her gut, a faint instinct that the air itself felt heavier. "Hey, Hawk!" Lieutenant Ryan Bowers called, jogging toward her with a clipboard in one hand and a half-empty coffee mug in the other. "Briefing in 5. You ready to dance?" Alex smirked. "Always ready to dance, sir. I just hope the music doesn't change mid-song." He laughed, unaware of how prophetic her words would be. Inside the briefing tent, the air was thick with tension. The hum of a portable generator drowned out the silence as maps were spread across the table. Intelligence had reported that a U.S. operative had been cut off deep in enemy territory, a mountainside village about 70 clicks north of their base. His extraction was top priority. A team of insurgents had been spotted closing in, and time was running out. Alex studied the terrain map closely. Narrow valleys, sharp elevation, perfect spots for ambushes. "We'll have to fly low," she said quietly, tracing a route with her gloved finger. "The ridges are tight, and radar coverage drops here and here. If someone's waiting with a shoulder-fired missile, we'll be sitting ducks." Captain Lewis nodded grimly. "That's why you're leading the bird, Hayes. You know how to thread a needle in a hurricane. We go in fast, drop the team, grab the operative, and get out before they know what hit them." Her eyes flickered toward the men around the table, 5 soldiers she'd flown with for months. They trusted her. They joked she had the instincts of a hawk, the eyes of a sniper, and the heart of steel. She took pride in that. After the briefing, she walked out to her helicopter, a Black Hawk painted with sand and scars from years of service. She ran her hand along its side, a ritual before every mission. "Don't fail me today, girl," she murmured. The engines roared to life. The vibrations rattled through her bones as the helicopter lifted, dust swirling in a storm below. She looked down at the base shrinking beneath her, tents, vehicles, soldiers waiting, until the desert swallowed them whole. The mission had begun. As the Black Hawk thundered over the mountains, Alex's headset buzzed with static. "Eagle One, this is command. You are clear for approach. Maintain low altitude and watch for radar anomalies." "Copy? Copy that," she replied, scanning the horizon. Her co-pilot, Sergeant Miller, adjusted the throttle. The rest of the crew sat in silence, their faces lit by the soft glow of instruments. The Afghan landscape stretched below them, a vast ocean of sand and stone. Villages looked like tiny freckles on the earth. Occasionally, Alex caught glimpses of movement, shepherds, perhaps, or something else. Every flicker made her stomach tighten. Her instincts whispered again, "Something's off." "Getting a weird echo on radar," Miller muttered. "Could be interference, or—" A sharp burst of static cut him off. Then silence. Alex frowned. "Command, repeat last transmission." "You're breaking up." No answer. She tried again, louder this time. Still nothing but dead air. That's when she saw it, a shimmer on a distant ridge. For a heartbeat, she thought it was sunlight reflecting off a rock. Then it moved. Contact. 2 o'clock. She barked. Possible sand launcher. The warning came too late. A streak of smoke tore through the sky. The missile came fast, a snake of fire slicing toward them. Alex jerked the stick hard to the left, the helicopter lurching violently. The missile missed by feet, exploding into a flash of white heat beside them. The force rattled the hull, Alarms screaming through the cockpit. "Flare! Flare! Flare!" Miller shouted, hitting the countermeasures. Bright bursts shot into the air, trailing sparks. For a moment, silence returned. Then another missile launched. Second incoming. This one struck. The explosion ripped through the tail, spinning the Black Hawk out of control. Flames burst from the engine. Inside, soldiers were thrown against the walls, shouting, gripping whatever they could as the helicopter twisted violently. "Mayday! Mayday! Eagle 1 going down!" Alex yelled into the radio, but no one answered. The world outside was a blur of rock, sky, and fire. Her mind focused on instinct, training drilled into her for years. Keep the nose level. Find open ground. Don't think about dying. "Brace! Brace! Brace!" she screamed. The impact came like a hammer from God. Metal shrieked as the helicopter smashed into a dry riverbed, kicking up clouds of dust and debris. The world exploded into sound, tearing, breaking, burning. When it stopped, everything was still. Alex hung upside down, strapped into her seat by a twisted harness. Smoke filled her lungs. Somewhere nearby, someone groaned, maybe Miller. She fought to free herself, slicing through the strap with her knife, hitting the ground hard. The rotor still spun weakly above her, whining like a dying animal. "Bowers! Miller!" she called, stumbling through the wreckage. Her voice was hoarse. No answer. The silence was heavier than the heat. She found 2 of her crew gone. A third barely breathing. She knelt beside him, pressing a trembling hand to his chest. "Stay with me," she whispered. But his eyes were already glazing over. Gunfire cracked in the distance. Alex froze. The echo came closer, methodical, sharp bursts. Shadows moved along the ridge, figures in desert robes advancing toward the wreckage. She reached for her sidearm, only to find it gone. Her M4 was buried under twisted metal. Her pulse quickened. She crawled toward the debris, fingers burning on the hot steel. A burst of gunfire tore up the sand inches from her face. She ducked, heart pounding. There was no chance for defense. She was outnumbered, exposed, and half-conscious. Rough hands grabbed her from behind, dragging her through the sand. She kicked, punched, fought, but her strength was slipping. A rifle butt smashed into her temple, and her world went black. When she came to, the sun was dipping low, bleeding orange across the horizon. The wreckage of her helicopter smoldered behind her, a black scar in the sand. She lay face down, wrists bound, boots gone. Around her stood 5 armed men, insurgents, laughing. One waved an American flag patch he'd ripped from her uniform. Alex didn't speak. She lifted her head, meeting his stare with ice-cold defiance. He sneered, pressing his boot to her shoulder. "You fight for a country that cannot save you," he said in broken English. She didn't blink. "You don't know who you just took," she replied softly. And for a brief second, he hesitated, because there was something in her eyes that didn't belong to a prisoner. Something fierce. Something unbreakable. The wind howled through the desert. The fire behind her crackled. And in that dying light, Sergeant Alexandra Hayes silently vowed they could capture her body, but never her will. That was the moment everything changed. The desert morning had been deceptively calm, almost too still, the kind of silence that seemed to hold its breath before chaos erupted. Inside the humming belly of the UH-60 Black Hawk, Sergeant Alexandra Hayes sat strapped into her seat, the vibration of the rotors pulsing through her boots. The rhythmic thud-thud-thud above her was familiar, comforting, like a heartbeat she had long ago synchronized with her own. She scanned the horizon through the open side door, nothing but endless waves of gold and brown. The rising sun painted long shadows across the ridges, jagged and sharp like the teeth of some sleeping beast. Her crew moved with practiced precision, checking weapons, tightening straps, running last-minute diagnostics. Lieutenant Bowers, sitting across from her, leaned forward and raised his voice over the engine noise. Intel says the extraction point is 20 clicks northeast. We go in low and fast. No lingering. Copy that, Alex shouted back. Her voice was steady, but her mind ticked with calculations. Wind speed, altitude, escape routes. She'd flown through enemy territory before, but today's route was tighter, more exposed. The helicopter climbed higher, slicing through thin air. The desert below blurred into a rolling sea of ochre and rust. Miller, her co-pilot, adjusted the cyclic, steadying their ascent. We're clean on radar, he said. No pings. Alex nodded, but unease prickled at her. She'd seen too much war to trust silence. In Afghanistan, silence wasn't peace. It was patience. Bowers cracked a grin. Relax, Hawk. You worry too much. She shot him a half-smile. That's why we're still alive, Lieutenant. Laughter rippled through the cabin. It was a small thing, but it broke the tension. For a few fleeting moments, the helicopter was filled with jokes and nervous energy, men and women clinging to humor like armor against fear. Then the laughter stopped. It happened in a heartbeat, a shimmer on the far ridge, barely perceptible against the heat haze. Alex's instincts screamed before her brain caught up. Contact! She yelled. 2 o'clock high. Possible SAM. Before anyone could react, a plume of smoke erupted from the ridge. The missile cut through the air like lightning, a white-hot streak of death aimed straight at them. Evasive. Hard left. Alex barked, grabbing the stick and banking hard. The helicopter tilted sharply, the horizon spinning. Flare! Flares out! Miller shouted, his thumb slamming the switch. Bright streaks of burning magnesium shot from the chopper, trailing fire. The first missile whooshed past, missing by a hair's breadth. The heat shook the cockpit. Cheers broke out, short-lived relief that shattered seconds later. Another plume launched. Then another. Oh, God! Bowers muttered. 2 missiles locked on. The sky became a storm. Hang on! Alex screamed. She twisted the stick, forcing the helicopter into a sharp dive. The rotors roared. Instruments blinked red. The crew clung to anything they could grab. The first missile detonated behind them, the shockwave tossing the aircraft like a toy. The second missile struck the tail. The explosion tore through the hull, a burst of fire and metal that sent the Black Hawk spiraling out of control. Tail rotors gone. Miller shouted, struggling with the controls. Alex's hands flew across the console, eyes darting between gauges. Warning screamed. Hydraulic pressure plummeted. Smoke filled the cockpit. We've lost lift. She shouted. Mayday! Mayday! Eagle One going down. Miller barked into the radio. Static answered. The world outside blurred. Sky, sand, sky again. The Black Hawk spun violently, rotors screaming against the air. One soldier was thrown against the bulkhead, another barely clinging to a safety strap. Alex gritted her teeth, fighting the stick. Her muscles strained. Hold together, damn it! Hold! Through the window, she could see the ground racing up to meet them, a patchwork of cliffs and broken desert. The terrain offered no mercy. Brace for impact. She shouted. The Black Hawk slammed into the desert with bone-breaking force. The sound was monstrous, twisting metal, shattering glass, the roar of fire. The nose dug deep into the earth, flipping debris into the air. The rotors snapped like matchsticks. Then silence. Alex's head hung forward, blood trickling down her temple. For a moment, she couldn't breathe. Smoke filled her lungs. Somewhere in the haze, she heard groaning, the muffled cries of her crew. Bowers, Miller. Sound off. She croaked. No answer. She unbuckled her harness, falling hard against the floor. Pain shot up her leg. Her helmet was cracked. The smell of fuel burned her nostrils. She crawled through the wreckage, dragging herself toward the rear compartment. The world was spinning, but adrenaline kept her moving. Bowers was slumped against the bulkhead, eyes open but empty. The sight hit her like a physical blow. She clenched her jaw and forced herself onward. Miller was still breathing, shallow, raspy gasps. "Stay with me?" she whispered, pressing her hand to his shoulder. He looked at her with glazed eyes. "We're hit bad. We need evac." She nodded, trying to keep her voice steady. "We'll get it. Just stay awake." But before she could reach for the radio, a distant rumble broke the silence. Engines. Alex froze. Over the ridge, black dots appeared. Pickup trucks, moving fast. Dust trails rose behind them like ghosts. Insurgents. They were coming. She grabbed her rifle, gone. Her sidearm, missing. The crash had stripped her of everything but her knife and her will. She scanned the horizon. Nowhere to run. No cover, no rescue. Miller coughed weakly. "Leave me, go." Alex shook her head fiercely. Not happening. The trucks drew closer. She could see the men in the back, armed, shouting, pointing. The sound of gunfire cracked through the air. Bullets chewed into the wreckage, sparks flying. Alex ducked low, dragging Miller behind a twisted panel of armor. Rounds tore through the metal, one grazing her shoulder. She bit down a cry of pain. "We're not dying here," she muttered through gritted teeth. But deep down, she knew they were surrounded. Moments later, a voice shouted in Pashto. Boots pounded against the dirt. Shadows fell over the wreckage. Alex reached for her knife, ready to fight to the last breath. But before she could move, a rifle butt smashed against the side of her head. The world dissolved into blackness. When she woke, the sky had changed color, the bright blue of morning replaced by the bruised purple of dusk. Her wrists were tied behind her back. Her mouth was dry, her body screaming with pain. Miller was gone. She lay in the sand beside the wreckage, surrounded by armed men. Their leader crouched in front of her, a tall man with dark eyes and a red scarf. He studied her face, then spoke in broken English. "American woman, pilot." Alex stared back, unflinching. He smirked. "You are lucky. Most die in crash. But not you. Maybe. Better this way." He stood, barking orders. Two men grabbed her, hauling her to her feet. She stumbled, her vision swimming. The wreckage of her Black Hawk burned behind her, a funeral pyre for her team. The leader gestured toward a waiting truck. "You come. We talk." Alex's jaw tightened. She didn't respond. She didn't cry. She didn't beg. As they pushed her into the vehicle, she looked back once, at the wreck, the rising smoke, the fading sun. A part of her wanted to scream. Another part, the soldier inside her, locked it all down. She had lost her bird, her crew, her freedom, but not her fight. The truck rumbled forward, disappearing into the desert. The burning helicopter grew smaller behind her until it vanished completely. And as night swallowed the horizon, one thought burned in her mind: she would get out. She didn't know how or when, but she would. Because she was Alexandra Hayes, a soldier of the United States Army, and she wasn't done fighting yet. When Alexandra Hayes regained consciousness, Her world had shrunk to a single room, 4 cracked mud walls, a flickering bulb that buzzed overhead, and a chain that bound her wrists to a rusted pipe. Her mouth was dry, her head throbbed, and a crust of blood sealed one eye half shut. Somewhere in the distance, a generator coughed weakly, cutting in and out, its hum blending with the faint echo of voices. She tried to move, but pain exploded through her shoulder. Every breath reminded her of the crash, the burning metal, the screams, the gunfire, and then the darkness that had swallowed it all. She lifted her gaze. The door was made of corrugated metal, dented from years of abuse. Beyond it, she could hear muffled laughter, male voices speaking in Pashto, followed by the clatter of a rifle butt against the floor. Alex closed her eyes and took a slow, steady breath. Fear wanted to take over, but she wouldn't give it the satisfaction. Training had taught her that panic was the enemy. It clouded judgment, made soldiers careless. She needed her mind sharp, her senses alert. She counted the seconds between the generator stutters. 12, then 10, then 8. Every pattern mattered. Every sound could reveal a detail she could use later. A shadow appeared beneath the door. The lock clicked. The metal groaned open, spilling harsh light across the dirt floor. 3 men entered, 2 armed guards and another who walked differently, with a kind of deliberate control. He wore desert fatigues and a black scarf, and his face carried a calm cruelty that made Alex's stomach twist. He studied her for a long moment. "American," he said finally, his accent thick but understandable. "Pilot?" She met his gaze. "Sergeant, U.S. Army." He smiled faintly, showing no emotion in his eyes. "Good, a soldier, strong." He gestured toward her wounds. "You fly the bird that crashed near Shamal Valley. Many dead, you survive." "Yeah," she rasped. "Sorry to disappoint." His smile faded. Without warning, he struck her across the face. Not a savage blow, but calculated, controlled. Pain flared through her cheek. "You do not speak to me like that," he said softly. "I am Commander Amir. You are my guest." "Guest," she muttered, blood on her lip. Funny kind of hospitality. He crouched, his face inches from hers. "You are alive because I wish it. You have value, Sergeant Hayes. The Americans will want you back. Maybe they trade. Maybe they send money. Or maybe—" He tilted his head. "You tell me things that make my life easier." Alex stared at him, unblinking. "You'll get nothing from me." He held her gaze for a moment longer, then rose. "We will see." He turned to the guards. "No food. No water. Not today." Then he walked out, the door slamming behind him. The sound of the lock clicking echoed through the small room, heavier than any explosion. Alex exhaled slowly, the metallic taste of blood in her mouth. She'd trained for survival, resistance, escape, but nothing in the manuals captured the raw humiliation of being helpless in enemy hands. Hours bled into each other. The room grew darker as the bulb flickered and died. Her throat ached with thirst. Her stomach clawed at itself. Time became an enemy she couldn't fight. By the second day, the door opened again. A different guard entered, young, nervous. He placed a dented metal bowl near her feet, a splash of water and something resembling rice inside. She looked up at him, reading his face. He couldn't be more than 20. He avoided her eyes. "You speak English?" she asked quietly. He hesitated. "A little. You have a family?" He didn't answer, just pushed the bowl closer with his boot and left. But the seed was planted, a small crack in the wall of fear between them. She'd need that later. That night, the desert wind howled outside. Alex sat in the dark, replaying the crash in her mind, every sound, every face. She could still hear Bauer's voice, still see the fire swallowing her helicopter. The guilt cut deeper than her wounds. She whispered their names under her breath like a prayer. Miller, Bowers, Jenkins, Torres. She promised them she wouldn't die here. On the fourth day, they came for her again. Two men grabbed her by the arms and dragged her outside. The sun was blinding. The world was nothing but dust and light. Her bare feet scraped across gravel as they pulled her into a courtyard. Dozens of armed men stood around, laughing, shouting. Children peeked from rooftops. She was the spectacle, the American pilot, the trophy. Commander Amir stood at the center, his black scarf whipping in the wind. He raised his hand, and silence fell. "You are in the heart of our land now," he said loudly, so everyone could hear. "You came from the sky with fire, and now you crawl on the ground like a worm. Tell your people what happens to those who bring war here." Alex met his gaze and said nothing. Her silence infuriated him. He nodded to one of his men. The guard struck her in the stomach with the butt of his rifle. She doubled over, but didn't fall. "Still proud," Emir said. "Good. Pride makes you strong. But pride breaks." He turned to the others and marked something in Pashto. The crowd laughed. The guards dragged her away again. Back in her cell, she collapsed to the ground, her breath ragged. But when she closed her eyes, she didn't see Amir's face. She saw a map. A mental image she'd built from her surroundings. The path they'd dragged her, the sound of gravel underfoot, the echo of a generator somewhere to the east. She was building her escape in her mind, one sense at a time. By the sixth day, Amir returned. This time, he brought a small recording device and a camera. "You will speak," he said. "You will tell your government to stop. You will say America loses." Alex stared at the camera lens. "No," he sighed. "Then you die." She leaned forward slightly, her eyes locked on his. "Then I die a soldier." He hesitated, just for a moment, then nodded to his guards. "Take her." They dragged her outside again. This time, she was led to a small airfield where a beat-up Soviet-made helicopter sat idling. Its rotors thumped the air, stirring sand around them. The sight of the helicopter made her chest tighten. Once, that sound had meant safety. Now it meant something else. Amir stood near the open side door. "We show your people what happens to invaders," he said. "You fly. You die. The world watches." She looked at the horizon, endless desert. Somewhere out there was freedom. Somewhere out there was a rescue that didn't yet know where to find her. She lifted her chin. "Do what you have to do." The guards grabbed her, binding her hands tighter. The wind whipped her hair across her face. The rotors screamed louder, drowning out the world. As they lifted her toward the chopper, Alex locked eyes with Amir one last time. "You think I'm afraid of falling?" she said over the roar. "I've already hit the ground once." For the first time, his expression faltered. Then the men shoved her toward the open door. The desert wind howled like a living thing. And as she was lifted into the air, Sergeant Alexandra Hayes made a silent promise to herself. If she hit the ground alive again, she would rise as something more than a survivor. She would become their reckoning. The desert wind screamed around the helicopter as it climbed higher, blades slashing through the hot Afghan air. Dust spiraled beneath it like a storm of gold. Inside, the cabin reeked of oil and sweat. Sergeant Alexandra Hayes sat wedged between two guards, her wrists bound so tightly that the ropes bit into her skin. Her hair whipped across her face, and the roar of the rotors drowned out everything except the pounding of her own heart. Commander Amir stood near the open side door, his scarf snapping violently in the wind. His expression was calm, almost regal, as though this were a ceremony. He looked down at the endless expanse of desert below, nothing but dunes, jagged rock, and deathly silence. "You will be remembered, American," he said over the roar. "But not as a hero, as a warning." Alex met his gaze, refusing to flinch. "You'll regret this," she said, her voice steady despite the wind tearing at it. He studied her for a moment, perhaps wondering how she could speak like that, bloodied, broken, bound, and still defiant. Then he gave a slow nod to his men. 2 guards seized her under the arms. She felt their grip tighten, felt her boots scrape against the metal floor. The air outside howled like a beast waiting to devour her. The desert stretched infinitely below, shimmering in the heat, hiding no mercy. She closed her eyes for a split second and thought of home, of her father teaching her to ride a bike in a green Texas yard, of the smell of her mother's kitchen, of the laughter of her squad before that final mission. For a heartbeat, she was there. And then the present snapped back like a whip. The guards dragged her to the edge. Amir leaned closer. "You fought well," he said softly, almost respectfully. "But every war ends the same way." Alex met his eyes one last time. "Not this one." And then they shoved her out. The world inverted. Air tore past her ears, hot and deafening. The helicopter's belly spun away above her, shrinking to a black dot against the blinding sky. For an instant, she felt weightless, suspended between life and death, between heaven and earth. Then gravity took hold. She plummeted. The ground rushed up with terrifying speed. Her heart hammered against her ribs, her mind racing. Training kicked in like a reflex. She tucked her chin, tightened her body, angled her fall. She had seconds, maybe 5, before the impact. Below her was not solid rock, as she had feared, but a slope of loose sand. A miracle. She hit hard. The world exploded in sound and pain. Sand filled her mouth, her nose. Her body rolled violently down the dune, her shoulders screaming with every turn until finally she stopped at the base, half buried, gasping, alive. For several seconds, she didn't move. The helicopter's roar faded overhead, growing distant until it disappeared entirely. All that remained was the sound of wind whispering across the dunes. Alex coughed, spat sand, and tried to sit up. Pain shot through her body like electricity, but she forced herself upright. Her wrists were still bound, her lips cracked and bleeding. Every breath felt like fire. She looked around. The horizon stretched in every direction, a sea of gold and heat. No signs of civilization. No roads, no water. Just survival, the kind she'd trained for, but never like this. "Okay, Hayes," she muttered under her breath. "Get up." She got to her knees, then to her feet, swaying slightly. Her body protested every move, but her mind was already calculating. The sun was descending in the west. She'd use that for direction. The wind carried faint traces of something, maybe smoke, maybe fuel, from the northeast. That meant movement, maybe a village or camp. She needed water, shelter, a plan. She turned her wrists inward, rubbing the rope against the jagged metal clasp on her boot. It scraped, bit by bit, until the fibers began to fray. The process took nearly an hour under the relentless sun, but at last the rope snapped. She tore it away and rubbed feeling back into her hands. The freedom of movement, even in pain, felt intoxicating. By dusk, she had begun walking. Each step sank into the sand, stealing her strength. Her uniform was torn, her boots half filled with grit. The desert was merciless, beautiful, but cruel. As night fell, the heat vanished, replaced by an icy chill that cut through her thin fatigues. Stars stretched across the sky like diamonds scattered by a careless god. Somewhere in that vastness, an American satellite might even be watching, but she couldn't rely on that hope. Hours passed. She stumbled, fell, rose again. Her mind drifted in and out, flashes of memory, fragments of voices. Her commanding officer shouting orders. The laughter of her team before deployment. The sound of her helicopter's blades, once the rhythm of her life, now replaced by silence. Then, just as exhaustion threatened to consume her, she saw something faint in the distance, a flicker of orange against the darkness. Firelight. Her instincts sharpened instantly. She crouched low, crawling toward it. The glow grew brighter, resolving into the small outline of a campfire, and around it 3 figures. Men with rifles slung over their shoulders, speaking quietly. Her pulse quickened. If they were insurgents, she was dead. But if they weren't, if there was a chance they were villagers, she had to take it. She circled slowly downwind, keeping to the shadows. A half-buried tarp flapped gently nearby. She crawled closer, barely breathing. The men's language was indistinct, Dari, not Pashto. Locals, maybe traders. Her hand brushed against a metal rod, part of a broken tent frame. She gripped it tightly. When one of the men stood to fetch something from their jeep, she moved. Swift, silent, precise. She struck from behind, hitting his legs, sending him sprawling. The others shouted, spinning with rifles raised. But when they saw her, the bloodied, half-dead American soldier standing in the firelight, weapon shaking in her hand, their confusion froze them. She lifted her hands slowly. "Please," she rasped. "I'm not your enemy." The oldest of the 3 stepped forward cautiously, lowering his rifle. His eyes scanned her uniform, her wounds, her desperation. "American?" he asked softly. She nodded weakly. "Helicopter. Crash captured." He exchanged quick words with the others, then nodded. "Come," quickly. They pulled her to the jeep, offering a canteen. The water burned her throat like acid, but she drank greedily. Within minutes, they were driving through the darkness, bumping over the rough terrain. She clutched the side rail, every jolt stabbing pain through her body. But she didn't care. She was alive, moving, no longer in their hands. "Where are we going?" she asked. The driver glanced at her. "A village." "You rest, then. Maybe we help." Her eyelids drooped. "Thank you," she whispered. The man smiled faintly. "God sees the strong." The rhythm of the engine lulled her into a half-sleep. The night air rushed past, cool and sharp. For the first time since the crash, she allowed herself to hope. But as the jeep rounded a ridge, she opened her eyes just in time to see something gleaming ahead. Headlights. 2 trucks blocking the road. Men stepping out with rifles. The driver cursed under his breath. "Not good men," he muttered. Alex's stomach dropped. Commander Amir's men had found them. The driver slammed the brakes. "Run," he shouted. Alex grabbed a small knife from the dashboard and bolted into the darkness, bullets slicing the air behind her. The desert erupted with chaos. Gunfire, shouts, the hiss of sand kicked by running feet. She stumbled down a slope, her lungs burning, her body screaming for rest. She fell behind a cluster of rocks and pressed herself flat, a knife trembling in her hand. Above, voices echoed, angry, searching. She closed her eyes, whispering to herself. "Not yet. Not here. You survive, Hayes. You survive." And as the moon rose over the barren wasteland, Sergeant Alexandra Hayes, broken, hunted, but unyielding, prepared for the next fight. Because being thrown from a helicopter handcuffed hadn't killed her. It had only reminded her what a soldier was capable of. The night was a living thing, restless, whispering, treacherous. The wind carried voices across the dunes, stretching them into ghostly echoes. Sergeant Alexandra Hayes crouched behind a jagged outcrop, her chest heaving, sand sticking to the sweat and blood on her skin. Every breath burned. Every heartbeat reminded her she was still alive. From her hiding place, she could see the beams of flashlights sweeping across the desert floor. Amir's men, a dozen or more, moved in wide arcs, rifles ready. Their shouts in Pashto carried through the night. She went this way. One barked. Alex pressed herself lower, barely breathing. The knife she'd grabbed from the jeep felt small and useless against men with automatic weapons. But she wasn't about to die cowering in the sand. She waited until the nearest beam of light drifted past, then moved, slow, silent, every movement deliberate. She crawled along the side of the dune, her body sinking into the cold sand. Her mind worked the way it always did under pressure, clear, focused, precise. There was a ridge ahead, a darker shadow against the night sky. If she could reach it, she might lose them in the maze of rocks beyond. She pushed forward, inch by inch. The men shouted again, closer this time. Bullets cracked through the silence, hissing past like angry hornets. One struck the sand inches from her leg, throwing up a burst of grit. She didn't look back. She just ran. Her boots pounded against the desert floor, her breath ragged. Pain screamed through her body, but adrenaline drowned it out. She leapt over a small rise and threw herself behind a boulder just as another burst of gunfire erupted. The world fell silent again. Her mind raced. She couldn't outrun them forever. She needed a plan, something to tilt the odds, even slightly. Her gaze swept the landscape. Rock, sand, the faint outline of the crashed jeep still burning faintly in the distance. And then she saw it, a shimmer in the air, like heat rising off the ground. A wadi, a dry riverbed. Perfect cover. She crouched low and began moving toward it, keeping her head below the horizon line. Her muscles trembled from exhaustion, but she forced herself onward. The sound of shouting grew fainter behind her. When she finally reached the wadi, she slid down the slope and landed hard, the sand cushioning her fall. The air was cooler here, the shadows deeper. She crouched, listening, nothing but the whisper of the wind. She allowed herself a single deep breath. Then she started walking again. The wadi twisted like a snake, narrow and unpredictable. Her boots crunched softly on the gravelly floor. Overhead, the stars glimmered faintly between jagged walls. She felt strangely calm, a kind of detached focus that came only after too much pain and too little sleep. Her mind drifted to her training: survival, evasion, resistance. Rule 1. Stay unpredictable. Rule 2. Find water. Rule 3. Stay alive long enough to be found. But who was looking for her? Did they even know she was still alive? The thought gnawed at her. Command had probably written her off as Kayar, another name carved into a granite wall someday. But she wasn't going to be a name. Not yet. By dawn, her legs gave out. She collapsed beneath a cluster of rocks, half covered in sand. The sun crawled up the horizon like a burning eye, painting the desert in gold and blood. She'd made it through another night, barely. Her throat was dry as bone. The canteen she'd taken was empty. Her skin was split and blistered from the sun. She tore part of her sleeve, wrapped it around her head, and pressed on. By midday, the heat was merciless. Mirage after mirage shimmered before her, lakes that vanished when she reached them, trees that dissolved into sand. She was dizzy, her vision blurring. Then, out of nowhere, she heard it, a faint hum. Mechanical. She froze. At first, she thought it was her mind playing tricks. But then it grew louder, rhythmic, metallic. An engine. She scrambled to a high point and scanned the horizon. There a plume of dust in the distance, moving fast. A vehicle. Her heart leapt. Maybe rescue. Maybe death. Either way, it was something. She waved her arms, shouting hoarsely. Hey! Hey! The vehicle slowed, then turned toward her. It came into focus, an old pickup truck, its paint sun-faded, loaded with crates. 2 men sat in the cab, one in traditional dress, the other with sunglasses and a scarf. When they stopped, the driver climbed out slowly, hands raised to show he wasn't armed. You are soldier? He asked in halting English. Alex nodded weakly. U.S. Army. Downed. Need help. He looked her over, filthy, bleeding, barely standing, and gestured for her to get in. She hesitated for half a second, scanning his eyes. They weren't hostile, just wary. She climbed into the back of the truck, collapsing against the crates. The engine growled, and they started moving again. She drifted in and out of consciousness. When she awoke, the truck had stopped at a small compound, mud brick walls, a few goats, and an old satellite dish perched crookily on the roof. The men carried her inside, laying her on a rug. An older woman appeared, her face lined with years of sun and struggle. She knelt beside Alex, giving her a small bowl of water. Drink slow, the woman said softly in accented English. Alex obeyed. The water felt like life itself. The younger man crouched nearby. You? American? He asked again. Yes, she whispered. My helicopter. Shot down. They took me. He nodded grimly. We hear of it. Bad men, Taliban. They think you die. Not yet, she muttered. The man's expression softened. You strong. For 2 days, they hid her there. The woman tended her wounds with herbs and old bandages. The young man, Kareem, kept watch outside, scanning for any sign of Amir's patrols. But word travels fast in the desert. On the 3rd night, Kareem burst into the room, panting. They come, he hissed. Trucks. Maybe 20 men. Alex sat up, ignoring the pain. How far? 5 minutes. She grabbed the knife from her belt and rose unsteadily. You need to leave, she said. Kareem shook his head. No, you are guest. Then you'll die as a fool, she snapped. Go. He hesitated, torn between pride and survival. Then, finally, he nodded. There is an old well beyond the hill. You can hide there. Come with me. He shook his head again. They know my face. You, they don't. Go. Alex met his eyes. Thank you. He smiled faintly. God watch you, soldier. She slipped out the back door, moving into the darkness as headlights appeared on the horizon. The trucks roared closer, men shouting, engines growling like beasts. She ran toward the hills, clutching her knife, every step agony. Gunfire erupted behind her. The compound exploded in flames. She didn't look back. She found the well just as the trucks arrived. It was dry, a pit of stone and shadow. Without hesitation, she climbed inside, lowering herself down until she was swallowed by the darkness. Above, boots crunched on gravel. Voices called out. Amir's voice was among them, calm, cold, certain. She was here, he said. Find her. Alex pressed herself against the wall, heart pounding, every muscle screaming for silence. Minutes passed like hours. The light of torches flickered across the edge of the well, but never descended. Finally, the sound of engines faded again. She exhaled slowly, trembling. In the darkness of that ancient well, surrounded by silence and loss, Sergeant Alexandra Hayes whispered to herself, not a prayer, not a plea, but a promise. They threw me out of the sky, she murmured. They think I'll vanish in the sand. Her voice grew stronger. "They have no idea what I'm coming back for." And as dawn bled across the desert, she began to climb. The sun rose like fire over the horizon, staining the desert in shades of red and gold. From the mouth of the old well, Sergeant Alexandra Hayes dragged herself out, her hands torn and bleeding from the rough stone walls. She collapsed onto the sand, gasping for air, her entire body trembling with exhaustion. But she was alive. Again, she rolled onto her back, staring at the wide sky. The same sky that had swallowed her helicopter. The same sky she'd been thrown from. "They'll wish they killed me," she whispered. For a long time, she lay still, conserving her energy as the sun climbed higher. The compound she'd escaped from was now a black smear on the horizon, smoke rising lazily into the air. She couldn't tell if Kareem and his mother had survived. The thought stabbed at her, but she couldn't afford to go back. Amir's men would be sweeping the area, looking for tracks, for footprints, for anything. So she moved. Slowly, methodically, she began her transformation from fugitive to ghost. She tore strips from her uniform and wrapped them around her hands and head for protection. She fashioned a sling from her torn jacket and stuffed it with a few small stones, makeshift ammunition. She smeared herself with sand and ash to dull her reflection. Every movement was guided by training, instinct, and sheer will. Her first objective was simple: survive. Her second was personal: find Amir. By late morning, she'd reached a rocky ridge that overlooked the desert basin below. From there, she saw tire tracks cutting across the sand, dozens of them. The convoy had passed recently, heading east toward a mountain range. Amir's base had to be somewhere there. Alex crouched, studying the tracks like a hunter reading a trail. Her heart hardened with every mark she saw. Then, as if fate had heard her vow, she spotted something glinting near one of the dunes. A rifle, half buried in sand. She approached cautiously. The weapon was battered, but serviceable. An AK variant, reliable, easy to maintain. Beside it, a discarded water flask, still half full. She smiled faintly. "Thanks, dessert." Armed again, she began her march east. The terrain shifted from sand to rock, from barren openness to narrow passes. Shadows lengthened as the day wore on. The desert tested her with heat, thirst, and fatigue, but she refused to bend. She moved with purpose now, like a soldier on a mission, not a prisoner escaping death. By nightfall, she had reached the foothills. Small fires flickered in the distance. Camps, maybe patrols. She lay flat against the rocks, watching through the scope she'd scavenged. Men with rifles lounged near the fire, their laughter sharp and careless. She recognized the insignia on one man's vest, the same group that had taken her. Her pulse steadied. She waited until one wandered away from the group to relieve himself behind a boulder. Quietly, she moved. The sand muffled her steps. When she was close enough, she swung the butt of her rifle with surgical precision. The man collapsed instantly. She dragged his body into the shadows and stripped him of his gear. A pistol, a radio, and most importantly, a map. The radio crackled faintly in Pashto, voices exchanging coordinates. She couldn't understand every word, but she caught one name clearly: Amir. Her blood ran cold and then hot. He was near. She studied the map under the dim starlight. The markings suggested a base carved into the mountains, an old Soviet outpost repurposed by militants. That was where Amir had taken her after the crash. She knew its layout: a single entry road, a communications tower, and caves branching deep into the rock. It wasn't just familiar ground. It was her battlefield now. She packed the supplies and began the trek toward the mountains. Every step forward was a step back into the heart of her nightmare, but this time she wasn't the victim. She was the storm they didn't see coming. When she reached the outer ridge by dawn, she saw the outpost clearly. Rusted vehicles, guards on watch, antennas poking up like skeletal fingers. Amir's black flag fluttered in the dry wind. She crouched low, scanning the perimeter. 2 guards at the main gate. A generator on the east side. Barrels stacked near a fuel truck. Explosives waiting to happen. Her plan formed quickly. She'd infiltrate from the east, set the fuel ablaze, create chaos, and then find Amir. But before she could move, something caught her eye. A flash of movement on a higher ledge. Through her scope, she saw a small American recon drone, battered, half-damaged, wedged between 2 rocks. Probably lost during an earlier skirmish. Its communications unit might still work. Her heart pounded. She climbed the ridge, ignoring the pain. The drone's camera was dead, but its transmitter light blinked faintly. She pried open the casing and found the emergency beacon intact. With trembling fingers, she adjusted the frequency and pressed the signal switch. The device beeped weakly, a distress ping on a secure U.S. military band. She held her breath. If it worked, the signal could reach a satellite, maybe even alert command. But it could also alert Amir if his men were scanning nearby frequencies. She decided to take that risk, and she moved downhill again, toward the outpost. By dusk, she was inside the perimeter, crawling through a drainage ditch. The air smelled of oil and metal. Voices echoed faintly, men talking, laughing, unaware of the ghost moving among them. She found the generator, humming steadily behind a sandbag wall. She unscrewed a fuel line and let gasoline pool on the dirt. Then she tossed a rag into the stream, lit it, and whispered, "For Kareem." The explosion tore through the base. Flames shot into the air, and chaos erupted. Men shouted, running in every direction. Alarms blared. Alex moved like a shadow through the smoke, rifle steady, eyes locked forward. She ducked behind crates, slipping past panicked guards. She could hear Amir's voice somewhere near the main building, barking orders, furious, trying to restore control. Her pulse quickened. She kicked open a side door, clearing rooms one by one. The heat was suffocating, smoke filling her lungs, but she kept going. Every step brought her closer. Then, at the end of a narrow hallway, she saw him, Commander Amir, his scarf burned at the edges, his pistol drawn. His eyes widened when he saw her. "You," he said, disbelief cracking his calm facade. Alex raised her rifle, her face streaked with soot and blood. "Miss me?" He aimed. They fired at the same time. His shot grazed her arm. Hers slammed into his shoulder. He staggered back, clutching the wound, but didn't fall. "You should have stayed dead," he hissed. "Yeah," she said coldly. "So should you." He lunged for cover, firing wildly. Bullets sparked off metal. Alex ducked behind a pillar, reloaded, then moved low and fast, her training taking over completely. When she reached the end of the corridor, she saw him limping toward the exit. She aimed again, but then the building shook violently as another explosion ripped through the compound. The floor cracked, throwing her off balance. Smoke and dust swallowed everything. When the noise cleared, Amir was gone. Alex coughed, dragging herself upright. She stumbled outside into the chaos, vehicles burning, men fleeing, ammunition cooking off in the flames. Above, the faint drone of aircraft echoed, American jets, drawn by her signal. Her plan had worked. She sank to her knees, overwhelmed by exhaustion and relief. But one thought still burned hotter than the fire around her. Amir was alive. And until he wasn't, her mission wasn't over. As helicopters roared overhead, this time American, Sergeant Alexandra, Hayes lifted her head toward the sky she'd once fallen from. The storm had come full circle. And this time, she wasn't falling. She was rising. The rhythmic beeping of the medical monitor was the only sound in the room. It pulsed in time with Sergeant Alexandra Hayes's heartbeat, slow, steady, and stubborn. Her eyelids fluttered open under the harsh light of a mobile medical tent. The air smelled of antiseptic and burned sand. For a moment, she thought she was still in the desert, trapped in that endless golden grave. But then, muffled voices reached her. English voices. Familiar, calm, controlled. Sergeant Hayes? Can you hear me? A medic asked, leaning into her blurry vision. His uniform was dust-covered, but the American flag on his shoulder gleamed. You're safe. You're with us now. Safe. The word sounded foreign. She blinked, trying to speak, but her throat was dry. Her lips cracked. The medic placed a tube of water near her mouth. Small sips, he warned. Each swallow felt like glass, scraping her throat. Her body screamed with pain, ribs bruised, shoulder dislocated, feet torn. But inside, her mind was razor sharp. Images flashed. The helicopter crash, her capture. The jeers of her tormentors. The wind tearing her apart as they threw her from the sky. Then the desert, the pain, the survival, the endless crawl toward freedom. Her voice was hoarse when she finally spoke. Where am I? Camp Reliant. A Allied recon unit found you 3 clicks south of Sector 9, the medic replied. You're a miracle, Sergeant. You shouldn't be alive. Alex tried to smile, but her lips barely moved. Yeah, I get that a lot. The medic chuckled softly, shaking his head in disbelief. Rest, you're safe now. The commander will want to debrief you once you're stable. But rest wasn't in Alex's nature. Even half-conscious, her soldier's instincts buzzed like live wires. She hadn't escaped to simply heal. She had unfinished business. Hours later, she was awake again, sitting up despite the medic's protests. Her shoulder had been reset, her wounds bandaged, her uniform replaced with clean fatigues. On a small table near her cot lay her recovered ID tags, still scratched and blood-stained. She stared at them for a long moment before turning to the officer entering the tent. Sergeant Hayes, the man said, his tone both respectful and cautious. Colonel Reeves, U.S. Central Command. Mind if I sit? Go ahead, she rasped. He took the chair beside her bed, clipboard in hand. You've been through hell. We need your help to understand what happened. The last contact your team made was before the crash. After that, Command lost all signals. Then you turn up 40 miles from the site, alive. He paused, studying her face. What happened? Out there, Sergeant? Alex inhaled deeply, her hands trembling slightly. It was an ambush. The valley wasn't empty. It was bait. They knew we were coming. Someone fed them intel. Reeves's brow furrowed. Inside leak? Has to be. They took me alive for a reason. Wanted information, troop routes, supply chains. I didn't give them a damn thing. Her voice hardened. The memory of her captor's laughter burned in her ears. They thought they broke me. Then they threw me from a helicopter, handcuffed. The colonel froze mid-note, disbelief flickering in his eyes. Thrown out? Yeah, Alex said flatly. Guess they didn't check if the sand dunes below were deep enough. Reeves stared at her, a mix of awe and anger washing over him. You're telling me you survived a drop from a chopper and made it across enemy territory with no backup, no supplies, and one dislocated arm? I didn't have much of a choice, she replied, her tone calm but fierce. Survival's part of the job description. Reeves leaned forward. Do you remember where they held you? Any coordinates? Landmarks? Alex closed her eyes for a moment. Her mind replayed the terrain. The cliffs, the bend in the river, The Path of the Sun. Her training kicked in. She had memorized everything. When she opened her eyes, her voice was steady. Yes, I remember all of it. She reached for the notepad on the table and began sketching rough coordinates and paths. They called it Camp Hallam, north side of the valley, built around old Soviet bunkers. 20, maybe 30 hostels. A radio tower here, used for jamming signals. Weapons storage near the riverbed. If you hit it from the east at dawn, you'll catch them by surprise. Reeves examined her drawings, his jaw tightening. These details could be gold, Sergeant. They're not details, she corrected him coldly. They're targets. 2 days later, under the harsh glow of command tent lights, Operation Silent Ember was born. It was a precision strike, designed to dismantle the insurgent camp and neutralize every last trace of the group responsible for killing her team. Alex stood near the tactical map, her arm in a sling, her voice unwavering as she briefed the soldiers. "These men killed my crew," she said, her eyes burning with controlled rage. "They wanted to send a message to America. So let's send one back." Every soldier in the room was silent. They'd heard stories about Sergeant Hayes, the woman who'd survived the impossible. But seeing her alive, fierce, and unbroken gave them something more powerful than fear. It gave them belief. "Air support will strike first," Reeves said, stepping in. "Then ground units move in to secure the area. We move at 0400 hours." As the room cleared, Reeves placed a hand on her shoulder. "You sure you're ready to be part of this?" Alex met his gaze. "Sir, I didn't come this far to watch from a hospital bed." The morning sky was a dim canvas of violet and gold as the helicopters lifted off. The rhythmic thump of the rotors vibrated through Alex's bones. She sat inside, her rifle across her lap, her eyes locked on the horizon. The men around her checked weapons and gear, but she was silent, lost in thought. Every second in that helicopter brought her closer to the place where she'd been tortured, where she'd been thrown to die. The thought didn't bring fear. It brought fire. Through the headset, Reeves's voice came calm and sharp. "Target confirmed. We are go for Silent Ember." Moments later, the first wave of missiles streaked through the dawn. Explosions rippled across the valley, bright bursts of fire devouring the camp below. Dust and flame erupted skyward as chaos unfolded. The enemy scrambled, shouting in confusion, but the Americans were already descending from the sky. Alex hit the ground running, her boots crunching into the dirt. Bullets cracked overhead, but she moved like a shadow, eyes fixed on the radio tower. 2 o'clock move, she barked. Her team followed without hesitation. Grenades thundered, sand sprayed, and the air filled with screams. Alex found herself face to face with one of her former captors, a man whose mocking laughter still echoed in her nightmares. Recognition flashed in his eyes, followed by pure terror. "This can't be," he stammered. "Oh, it is," Alex said coldly and fired. When the dust finally settled, the camp was nothing but wreckage and silence. Smoke rose in the distance, carrying the scent of vengeance fulfilled. The American flag patch on Alex's uniform was streaked with ash and blood, but it gleamed proudly in the morning sun. Hours later, back at base, Reeves approached her with a grim smile. "We got them all. The camp's gone." Alex stared out at the horizon, the weight of justice heavy but satisfying. "Good," she murmured. "My team can finally rest." Reeves nodded, his respect evident. "You didn't just survive, Sergeant. You turned survival into victory." Alex turned to him, her eyes calm, her voice steady. "No, sir. I just did what soldiers do, finish what others start." The wind outside howled softly through the desert, whispering through torn banners and burnt earth. And for the first time in months, Sergeant Alexandra Hayes allowed herself to breathe, not as a survivor, but as a warrior who had reclaimed her fire. The sound of applause echoed across the hall, bouncing off polished walls and chandeliers. Alexandra Hayes stood at attention, uniform immaculate despite the scars that no one could see, the medals that pinned her chest gleaming under the lights. Cameras flashed. Reporters whispered. The weight of her story, the crash, captivity, escape, and vengeance, pressed down on her, but she held herself tall, a soldier among soldiers, a hero who had walked through fire and emerged unbroken. Colonel Reeves stepped forward, a crisp smile on his face. "Sergeant Alexandra Hayes," he began, voice carrying across the packed room. "For your courage, your resilience, and your unwavering dedication to duty, the United States Army proudly awards you the Distinguished Service Cross." A medal glimmered as it was pinned to her chest. She felt the weight of it, not just metal, but memory, sacrifice, and every life lost in the desert that she carried with her. Her throat tightened. "Sergeant Hayes," Reeves continued, "you faced death, captivity, and the unimaginable. Yet, through it all, you exemplified the highest standards of valor and duty. Your actions inspired not just your fellow soldiers, but a nation." Alex scanned the room. Faces blurred in her vision. Her parents, her siblings, her friends, and her squad mates' families. She remembered each of them in that helicopter. Miller, Bowers, Torres, Jenkins. They were gone, but their memory burned bright in her chest, as fuel for her strength. She swallowed hard, voice catching. I don't stand here alone," she said, steadying herself. "Every soldier I lost, every life taken in that valley, was a reminder that we fight not just for ourselves, but for each other. I am here because of them, because of all who never came home, and because of the courage we find in the darkest moments." A hush fell over the room. Even the reporters were silent, captivated by the raw sincerity behind her words. After the ceremony, she stepped outside into the warm sunlight. The crowd had gathered, some waving American flags, others holding signs with messages of gratitude and support. Cameras followed her as she walked, the medal catching the light like a beacon. Despite the triumph, her mind wandered back to the desert, to the endless dunes, the scorching sun, the night she had crawled through the wadi, the explosions, and the gunfire. The faces of her captors, especially Commander Amir, haunted her still. But the desert had not broken her. It had sharpened her, made her a soldier who could survive anything, who could take back what had been stolen from her. A reporter approached cautiously, microphone extended. "Sergeant Hayes, how did you survive being thrown from a helicopter handcuffed and captured?" She looked at him, calm but piercing, the kind of gaze that could freeze a man in place. "I survived because I refused to die for them," she said. "I survived because every second I reminded myself that giving up was never an option. Being a soldier means carrying hope into impossible situations and fighting with everything you have, even when the world tells you it's over." Her words rippled across the airwaves. Interviews and broadcasts, striking a chord nationwide. People marveled at her resilience, but more than that, they felt inspired by her refusal to surrender to despair. Weeks later, Alexandra returned to her hometown in Texas. The streets were lined with people waving flags, cheering and holding handmade banners. "Welcome home, hero." She stepped from the plane, fatigue etched into her bones, but the fire in her eyes never dimmed. Children ran forward, reaching for her hand. Veterans saluted. Families embraced her with tears and gratitude. Her parents, frail with age but unbroken, hugged her fiercely. Her mother whispered, "You've made us so proud, Alex." Her father's hand trembled as he held her face. "You came back to us. You're a soldier, a warrior, and now a symbol." She nodded, swallowing the lump in her throat. There was no joy without sorrow. Every medal, every honor, reminded her of what had been lost and what she had survived. Later that night, in the quiet of her childhood bedroom, Alexandra sat alone on the edge of her bed, the metal resting on her dresser. She traced its surface with her fingers, feeling the weight of history, of sacrifice, of everything she had endured. Her thoughts drifted to the desert again, to Karim, who had helped her survive, and to the villagers who had risked everything, to the mountains, the wadi, and the helicopters, both the one that fell and the ones that had finally lifted her to safety. And then her mind settled on Amir. He had survived the inferno at his base. He would be hunted, eventually captured or eliminated. But she didn't dwell on vengeance anymore. That battle had been fought and won, in the desert, in the fire, in the chaos. What mattered now was the next mission. Living, bearing witness, ensuring that her story and the memory of those she had lost would never be forgotten. In the months that followed, Alexandra returned to service, not as a broken survivor, but as a mentor and symbol. She trained new recruits in survival, evasion, resistance, and escape, imparting the lessons the desert had forced upon her. Every story she shared was laced with honesty, with the truth that courage was not the absence of fear, but the decision to act in spite of it. News outlets covered her story relentlessly. Children in schools learned of her bravery. Veterans reached out to thank her for representing their shared struggle. Her image was on magazine covers, on television, on motivational banners. But Alexandra remained humble. She never saw herself as extraordinary, only as someone who refused to give up. One quiet evening, she returned to the desert, this time as herself, not a soldier in battle. The dunes stretched before her, familiar and unforgiving. She walked slowly, barefoot in the sand, letting the wind wash over her. The memories came, the crash, the captivity, the explosions, but instead of pain, there was clarity. She had survived the impossible, faced death, reclaimed her power, and honored the fallen. She knelt in the sand, leaving a small memorial, a folded American flag, a stone for each of her fallen comrades, and a simple note, "For those who cannot speak, I carry your voice." The wind whispered through the dunes, carrying the words away, scattering them into the vastness of the desert. Alexandra rose, standing taller than ever, eyes on the horizon. The sun dipped low, painting the sky in fiery hues, as though the heavens themselves acknowledged her journey. The desert had tested her. The enemy had sought to break her. The sky had thrown her from death. But she had risen. And Sergeant Alexandra Hayes, handcuffed once and thrown from a helicopter, had shown the world exactly what a soldier could do. The story of Sergeant Hayes became legend, not just a tale of survival, but a testament to courage, resilience, and the indomitable spirit of those willing to face impossible odds and rise above them. Her medals, her scars, her stories, all served as a reminder. Heroes are not born in comfort, but forged in fire. And some, against all odds, rewrite the rules of survival, leaving a legacy that inspires generations. And so, the world remembered her name, Alexandra Hayes, soldier, survivor, warrior, and symbol of the unbreakable human spirit. The 8-part saga of Sergeant Alexandra Hayes concludes here, tracing her journey from the crash, captivity, and desert survival to rescue, vengeance, and ultimate recognition. It's a complete cinematic real-life story of courage, resilience, and triumph against all odds.